Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars book review. This is going to be for Star Wars Queen's Hope by E.K. Johnston. So this is the third of, I guess, three sort of Padme and Handmaiden focused novels. We obviously started off with Queen's Shadow. Then the second book was actually the prequel, Queen's Peril. And this is actually a sequel to Queen's Shadow. Queen's Hope. I honestly don't have too much to say about this one, so this will be a bit of a quicker review here. I listened to the audiobook for this one, so that's why I don't have the physical book in hand at the moment. I like the other books, like I enjoyed it, but I definitely felt like I had more like issues with this book. Nothing like major, just structurally, I don't think this one felt as solid as the others. The others felt like they were more planned out and had more like to them. They knew what they wanted their plot, their arc to be within that book. This one just kind of felt like we want to do more of this. And okay, we have a few events to base it around, but we don't really have an arc as such. And I was left feeling kind of frustrated by the end of it, in that, is there going to be more? There's definitely room to do more, and this did not really feel like this satisfying conclusion necessarily. I'll talk about sort of this full spoilers, because one, I don't think it's a book that really can be spoiled all that much, because it's not like crazy eventful, and I don't really think there's much to talk about kind of non-spoilers, other than to say that if you enjoyed the first two books, you'll probably enjoy this, because you get Padme, you get Sabe, you get a little bit of the other handmaidens, and a few other bits and pieces throughout. The plot of this book, I would not say is very strong. It is very much character driven, character focused, which is what the other books were, but this one like even more so, because it, I think, really relies on a couple of like really fun scenes, which are very much only like a fraction of the book overall. Probably my biggest frustration with this book was that actually in a way, the plot of the book, the thing that takes up most of the time, is probably the least interesting aspect of this book. Padme being sent on this like basically rescue mission where she has to get involved in the action again. That's what keeps her away from Anakin. It's what keeps her away from the handmaidens and Sabe, and it means Sabe has to actually fill in as Padme in the Senate. That's sort of the thing that sort of in a way sets the core plot into motion, is kind of disappointing, because what this plot does is it means Padme is just basically on her own. I think it's her and like Typho on this mission. And what actually the actual like details of this mission, I just, other than like Padme being like, you know, this kind of nice mix of being a good politician but also being able to fight if needed, the plot didn't do much for me. The main reveal by the end of it is that it's actually, she's been sort of asked out here by this more positive Trade Federation person who actually wants to sort of, in a way, make amends for what the others have done. And it's just sort of Padme slowly beginning to realize that it's not the entire sort of Nemoidian species, the full Trade Federation, that there are still good people within that. And, you know, there's a scene after that with Palpatine where he realizes what's happened and is like, I can't believe that someone within the Trade Federation is trying to kind of go good, and it's sort of him plotting to sort of undo this. But again, that's just sort of left there, and it doesn't feel like it's anything, you know, particularly important, that this plot, which is quite a bit of the book, literally just existed so that Padme was away from the characters. But what it also did was that it meant you got less scenes of Anakin and Padme after they've been married. You get less scenes with Padme interacting with the handmaidens, which is the whole point of these books. And in a way, the whole book basically sets up after this point for the big moment when Padme and Sabe will finally talk again. And it works, but you're left wanting sort of more, like that you wish there was more scenes between them beforehand, that this arc was just slightly better done. And I feel they could have probably skipped over a lot of the main plot of this book and just focused on the character dynamics, because that's what I think you're here for with this book, and not any of the other stuff really at all. Like I said, that main plot just for me didn't quite work. Similarly, like what you have sort of Sabe doing on her own, just like, okay, here's some political stuff, she attends this party. What you're doing with the book, like I like aspects of what they do, but it feels like it does get distracted by its own plot, in that the character stuff that you're trying to do here is to sort of show that, like, oh, a lot of the handmaidens basically come to realize, oh, Padme just got married, because some of the stuff that had to be organized, given that they had the ceremony on Naboo, involved her having to get like a wedding dress. So, you know, the handmaiden who's into that sort of side of things knows about it. And even though she doesn't maybe directly tell them, they basically, most of them become aware that, you know, Padme is married to Anakin as well. And that's just like a kind of secret that they trust them all to be loyal and not, you know, say anything about it, because they obviously really respect Padme. The main thing in this book is basically Sabe finding out about it, because she comes back into things, and because of the timing of how Padme being sent off happens, she doesn't quite get an opportunity to sort of talk to Sabe and say that, hey, I got married. She's sort of like, okay, I have to go on this mission immediately. I'll tell you when I get back. But of course, one of the best scenes in the book is that how Sabe finds out is that she's, you know, acting as Padme. So she's living in like Padme's apartment. And Anakin basically sneaks in at night. And so it's this really fun moment where like they just end a chapter with Sabe in bed thinking that like there's like an invader coming in to like kill her or something like that. So she's got like a blaster out ready to shoot. And then there's a 2 or 3 chapter gap before you cut back to it to see the actual reaction. But then it's more from like Anakin's perspective of like immediately being like, where's Padme? Like he knows straight away that it's not Padme there. So that's how Sabe finds out. And they play on it a little bit later on where like, okay, Sabe's like, oh, I can't believe, she feels a little bit betrayed, a little bit jealous of the fact that, oh, this is her discovering, because Anakin is right here, that, oh, Padme's like fallen in love with Anakin and is in a relationship with him. Why wouldn't she tell me? And then in a later scene where it feels like Sabe and Anakin sort of make amends for this kind of like rough interaction, she kind of comes to realize that, oh, wait, you're not just like in a relationship together where you love each other. You've got married, haven't you? And it's just this complete like extra bit on top of that further just sends her down this kind of path of realizing that, oh, Padme's changed. Usually she wouldn't keep things from us, any of the handmaidens, but she has here. That her beginning to hide things and keep more secrets than maybe is usual, not tell Sabe, who is really, really close to her, about these things, kind of highlights this idea of like, well, oh, I guess I'm changing too, and that she's slowly coming to realize that while she is capable of fulfilling the role that Padme fulfills, she's beginning to just find it more and more difficult to do that, because in a way, because the person she's trying to act as is changing, she's finding it more and more difficult to almost like be that person. And you can feel that sort of disconnect happening of like, Sabe is the queen's shadow, and that shadow is beginning to sort of fail here. And the resolution to all of this in the final scene is Padme and Sabe finally do talk about things. And it is a good conversation. I just think it takes a lot to get there. And I don't think the length of this book is worth, you know, just that one scene. I think it needed a little bit more. We needed a little bit more afterwards. But effectively, you know, they talk it through. She's already, from meeting Anakin, come to realize like, oh, I can sort of see why Padme, you know, likes Anakin. But seeing it sort of from her perspective, actually getting the discussion here is good. But then she does say to Padme, don't ask me to sort of, become you again. It's not happening anymore. So it's sort of, Sabe quitting, but on good terms, and she's now going to go about her own life separate from this. But it's still somewhat related to kind of, Padme's wishes, in that I think it was the setup for the end of the first book was that Padme sent Sabe and someone else out to Tatooine to basically buy slaves and free them in an attempt to try and free Shmi Skywalker. So that's kind of cool the way that kind of worked. And at the start of the book, they sort of get across the idea that, oh, she actually gets on quite well with the guy that she's kind of running this operation on Tatooine with. And then and in the final sort of scene for Sabe, we sort of cut back to her arriving back, in a way, sort of returning home, and basically the start of her relationship properly with this person. So it's that unique dynamic of, like, they both, Padme and Sabe, have both sort of found love, and it's at the point where they've sort of, their friendship has sort of changed slightly. So, it was interesting, but it's also odd just with some of the way that they did it, and that it doesn't really feel like much of a conclusion, in that there's clearly more to come back to with Sabe. Again, I know the comics cover stuff with Sabe, but it feels like there's something else to do. The book has basically the same sort of interlude chapter style thing that the previous book had, the Queen's Peril, whereas that one focused on sort of how all the different handmaidens were recruited initially. This one focuses basically one on each of the, I suppose, main female characters from the Skywalker family, or sort of involved or related to the Skywalker family. So, you get like a Beru little interlude, you get a Shmi interlude, you get a Breha Organa interlude, that sort of thing. And again, they're these quick chapters that just give you a sense for sort of the strength of each of these characters and sort of what's going on. It also, through this is where you get, I suppose, a lot of the sort of Tatooine stuff of, like, oh, a little bit of a different angle on Shmi and Klieg, and the whole dynamic with, oh, the slaves have these things implanted in them that blow up, and that Beru was heavily involved in sort of trying to come up with a solution to sort of counter them, to basically get people out of slavery. That was kind of interesting. But again, it's like, it was a very brief chapter. Again, I don't know page count because I listened to it in audiobook, but each of these interludes were only felt like 2-3 minutes, if even that. So like those chapters from the previous book, quite short. The other thing with the book is that, like, there is other stuff going on, and in that sense the book does feel a little scattered, in that there's just randomly some cutovers to Palpatine doing stuff, which doesn't really amount to much. There's a few scenes from, like, Anakin's perspective, just, dealing with those early days of the war, and that's really it. I definitely feel like this is probably the one that felt the most, like, not fully planned. That my understanding of this is that the initial plan was write one book, write one Padme book, and that was Queen's Shadow. There was a natural option to then do a prequel, Queen's Peril. That's fine, that works. This sequel definitely felt like it's sort of like, well, let's sort of turn it into a trilogy, but we don't have a ton of content. I just come out of this feeling a little bit frustrated that, given what you focused on here, Anakin and Padme's wedding, just the kind of lead up to it, the immediate aftermath, and the sort of drama around that, there should have been way more, like, really fun, exciting, enjoyable scenes between the characters. But surprisingly, the book really, it felt like it sort of held back on a lot of that it really wanted to play on the idea that even, like, immediately upon them getting married, they still don't see each other much, even though this was your opportunity to have, like, a lot of Anakin Padme. They do enough, I think, over the dialogue to just get across, their relationship a little bit more. And in scenes with other characters, but I definitely came out of the book feeling like I wanted way more Padme Anakin scenes, way more Anakin Sabe scenes, and way more Padme Sabe scenes. You cut over to like the other handmaidens like every so often in the book, but for the most part, the other handmaidens feel like they're just there. Like, it's still a dynamic in the book that, like, this is sort of Padme's team, but a lot of them are all doing their own things now, and it's like Padme's life is kind of making her feel a little bit more separate to them, and she's had to get new handmaidens on to fill in the gaps for the handmaidens that have died over the years. And it's like, okay, this makes sense, but it didn't feel anywhere near as fleshed out with the other characters as the previous books did, where I felt like it did a better job at it being more than just Padme and Sabe and the others. The others very much just felt like, and the rest in this book. So, if you like the other two books, you will enjoy this one, but this one feels the least solid of them. I think it still has some very strong moments. Like, that scene when, Anakin walks into Padme's room and it's Sabe there is really fun. Like, you have a grin on your face the whole time, like, waiting to see how this resolves itself. But for every one of those scenes, I felt like you had just here's Padme out on the battlefield just for the sake of things, and to have this plot with this Trade Federation guy to slightly change things. And they tried to play into it with a little bit of an arc that was like, oh, Padme reflecting on like the episode 2 stuff, where like she so effortlessly was able to sort of immediately take command of clone troopers, and I suppose, just dealing with and accepting this more action orientated aggressive negotiation side of herself. That was quite nice, in that there's a scene where, even though, say, Mon Mothma is one of Padme's allies, she does kind of confront Mon Mothma over, like, okay, you're like a full-on pacifist. I'm not. This mission required someone who was capable of doing things like I did. Is that cool? So, you get those moments, but for a book that's like relatively short, it definitely felt like there wasn't much to it overall, and that I wanted the character stuff to be more, the plot to be less, or for there to be more of just a clear-cut plot direction where things are going. But yeah, before I start repeating myself, I'm just going to end it there. In the comments, let me know your thoughts were on this book if you read it. Other than that, that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.